Welcome back. The Israeli military has signalled that it has wrapped up major combat in northern Gaza, saying it has completely dismantled Hamas's military infrastructure there. More than 22,800 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since the Hamas attacks on October the 7th, according to the region's health ministry. Well, let's speak to Mark Regev now, senior advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. A very good evening to you. Let's start with those operations in the north of Gaza. Does this mean that the end of the conflict is now in sight?
Well, to paraphrase your famous world wartime leader, Winston Churchill, it might not be the end, but it could be the beginning of the end, because we're seeing the destruction of Hamas's military machine in the northern Gaza Strip. We're seeing their inability now to work in an organized combat formation, the destruction of their battalions, of their brigades. Of course, there still can be small squads of Hamas fighters there that we have to still mop up. But we can say that we've had significant success there in the northern Gaza Strip.
So for those many thousands of people who've been displaced from their homes, can they now return? Will you allow that? And will you help with the rebuilding of the north?
I'm sure that it will have to wait for the end of combat operations, though we are working very hard to facilitate humanitarian aid for the people of Gaza who have been relocated. Let's be clear, they are alive because they took our advice, heeded our calls, and they left the north where there was very, as you will recall, very severe fighting. We didn't want to see civilians caught up in the crossfire, and it's good that they left the area of the north. You will recall in Gaza City and in other parts of the north there was very intensive fighting, and it's good that they left. Hopefully they'll be able to return to their homes in the not-too-distant future.
And as the operations continue in the south, given that today is the 3-month anniversary of this war, do you expect the conflict to last for at least another 3 months, possibly longer, reports suggesting until the end of the year?
So it's clear to destroy Hamas's military machine, it will take time. But that doesn't mean that it will be more of the same necessarily. On the contrary, as the conflict changes, we will still be operating in the north, but it's a different type of combat because you've destroyed Hamas's organized ability to fight as a combat machine. So we'll reach that situation too in the south. We will blow up their subterranean terror network, the tunnels, the underground launching sites, the headquarters and so forth. And as the operation moves forward, of course, there's a change in the tactics.
The fighting then could go on for many more weeks, potentially many more months. But the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, as you will have heard in the last hour, says far too many Palestinian civilians have been killed. Is there an increasing disconnect, do you think, between the positions of Israel and the US?
We agree that there have unfortunately been too many civilian deaths. We didn't want to see a single civilian death, and we've tried to make a maximum effort to avoid civilian deaths. But I've been in meetings today and I've seen the figures. The number of civilians getting caught up in crossfire has been going down, and our ability to kill Hamas in a more surgical way has increased precisely because we're doing this ground-to-ground fighting today, which obviously means that our forces are engaging often in close quarters combat with Hamas, and that seems to reduce the level of unintended casualties.
So you've seen the figures. Are you able to share them with us? How many innocent civilians have been caught in the crossfire? What's the number that you've seen today?
So, of course, Hamas's numbers, we have to presume they're exaggerated because they are Hamas's numbers. And we believe above 8,000, we can confirm above 8,000 combat casualties. But we'll have to wait to the end of this before we know the exact numbers of people who've been killed in this conflict.
Once again, about 14,000 innocent civilians then, if we take Hamas's figures as a rough guide.
So if you take them as a rough guide, that's your decision. I would say they're most likely exaggerated. There's a whole question here, of course, what is an innocent civilian? Because as you know, Hamas fighters, the Hamas terrorists don't necessarily wear uniforms. They dress civilians. Hamas uses, unfortunately, They exploit the children of Gaza, 16-year-olds, 15-year-olds. If a 15-year-old is shooting at an Israeli soldier and he's killed in the cross, because he's in combat, is that a child fatality, or is that a civilian, or is that a combat fatality? Obviously, Hamas plays with the numbers in the way that suits them. That they use children in combat, of course, is a war crime. They should not do it in the first place. One of their many war crimes.
Is there a limit to how many of those innocent civilians will die before Hamas is destroyed? Does Israel put a limit on that, or is it limitless?
Look, this could all end tomorrow without a single more civilian casualty. The Prime Minister said publicly last week, he said Hamas can either die in combat or they can surrender peacefully. And if they surrender, this is over straight away.
Let's talk a little bit about aid. The US Secretary of State saying it's imperative the people of Gaza get the aid they need. He says that the barriers remain far too high for them getting that aid. Why aren't they getting it?
So, obviously, we want aid to reach the civilian population of Gaza. We don't want to see unnecessary suffering. That's why on the first week of this war, 3 months ago, we said there will be no restrictions whatsoever on food, medicine, water going into the Gaza Strip. We can add to that now tents and other, to help people live and get through the winter nights. We don't see the people of Gaza as the target of our operation, and we want to expedite aid. That's precisely why we opened up an additional crossing. That's why we facilitated checks of the material going in. And from Israel's point of view, once again, there's no restrictions whatsoever on food, on water, on medicine going into the Gaza Strip.
And yet a quarter of the people of Gaza, we hear, are starving. The situation when it comes to sanitation is appalling. Hundreds of trucks should be going in every day, but that isn't the case.
So we've increased the number of trucks going in, and we will continue to do so. Once again, we're willing to do everything it takes to facilitate a humanitarian effort for the people of Gaza. We're in the, as we speak, we're talking of working with others to set up special humanitarian zones where people can live while the fighting continues in a safer place. We want to see the people of Gaza kept out of the crossfire between Israel and the Hamas terrorists.
Let's talk a little bit about what Antony Blinken had to say about the future in Gaza. He said two interesting things, I thought, in the last hour. The UN can play a role in evaluating what needs to be done to allow displaced Palestinians to return home in Gaza. Would you agree with that? Has the UN got a big role there?
Well, the UN has had a role. The question is, has it been a constructive role? And one of the problems we've found is that some of the UN organizations have been so much infiltrated by Hamas. It's almost as if they're doing Hamas's bidding. I'll give you an example. The largest UN organization in the Gaza Strip is an organization called UNRWA. And though we know for a fact that Hamas has been stealing aid, they refuse to publicly confirm that or to say that. And though there's the people of Gaza themselves say so, but UNRWA won't say so. And if you listen to UNRWA's statements, it's all Israel's fault. So they don't have a single statement, I believe, that actually criticizes Hamas. And we're concerned because Hamas wants a ceasefire, that they're actually doing their best to stifle aid reaching people, and through their control of UNRWA, they can do so. And the idea is to expedite or to increase the suffering so as to force a ceasefire on Israel, which will keep Hamas in power. Obviously, that's not humanitarian, that's political.
OK, that's a point you've made previously on Sky News. Let me put this to you as well, something else Antony Blinken said. He said the US has a vision when it comes to security post this conflict. Does that mean that Israel's vision isn't good enough? Is there conflict there between what the US and Israel see as the future? Because that certainly seems to be the way, that appears to be what's happening.
Well, we both agree that Hamas can't be in power when this is over. And there's common agreement on that, I think, not just between the United States and...
and who is in power afterwards, isn't it? That's the disagreement.
So once again, we agree that Hamas will be destroyed, that they will no longer run the Gaza Strip. And then Israel says, as you know, Jonathan, we say Gaza must be demilitarized and de-radicalized. And we can have a discussion with our American allies and with others, the British, the Germans, others who've been good friends during this conflict. We can have a discussion on how best to do that.
There's no agreement at the moment, is there?
I think there's understandings on the overall strategy, which is Hamas must be destroyed. There can be nuances on what comes afterwards. Once again, we would like to see a government by Palestinians for Palestinians, a government that, of course, insists on the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip and the de-radicalization. We want to see the children of Gaza not educated to become suicide bombers and to kill Jews, but we want to see people there educated to embrace the opportunities of life.
OK. All right. We are out of time. Mark Regev, thank you.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan.
Plenty more on the situation in the Middle East.